offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will.
Thank you, Brinkley. That's the verse where we will be landing tonight. We are in the middle of a relationship series. And in the past, I've talked about romantic relationships. This year, we're keeping it kind of simple. We're talking more about friendships and relationships across the board. And so a few weeks ago, we started this series, and we simply asked this question. We simply asked, what is your vision for the future? When you think about your relationships, when you think about what you want your life to look like, what is your vision for the future? Because the truth is that our friends determine the direction of our lives. Our friends determine the direction of our lives. And so we talked about how vital it is that we choose our friends carefully and we allow certain people to influence our lives and give them more influence, and we allow others to have less influence in our lives. And then last week we talked about guarding our heart and how important and vital it is that we simply guard our heart. Everything we do, our entire lives, flows out of our heart. And so we've got to put up guards and guard ourselves way before we are in a situation where our heart needs guarded. So our PowerPoint it's not up there, is it? We've had trouble tonight with our system, so I'm going to push this out of the way so it's not just a big Worship Uncoiled logo. All right. And so tonight we are going to talk about breaking cycles. We're going to talk about breaking cycles. Have you ever had one of those friends who just constantly and consistently makes the same bad decision? Like, you know the direction that they should go. They know the direction that they should go. And yet you still see them end up in a place where you're like, dude, you know better. Like, you know better. I went to school in Cincinnati. I talked a little bit about going to school in Cincinnati last week. When I was there, I was involved in a homeless ministry. And so the way this worked was basically our campus was about 5 minutes from downtown. So we would go to downtown Cincinnati. There's a big square right in the middle of the city. And we would meet with a few of the homeless population in Cincinnati, either on that square or in a courtyard by the library. And over the time of doing this homeless ministry, we got to know some of the people there. One of the guys that I will always remember, his name is William. And I went into the homeless ministry assuming and thinking that we were going to go down to Cincinnati. We were going to meet these people that were struggling, that needed some help. We were going to be able to give them some resources and give them some ways to get their lives out of this homelessness and reassimilate into the culture. And I learned a lot about homelessness helping in this ministry. And the truth of the matter is that many people that are homeless because they have cycles in their lives that are keeping them homeless. Cycles of addiction, or cycles of mental illness, or cycles of just not wanting the responsibility of being a part of society. And so I met this guy, William. William was, this guy always had a smile on his face. William lived in the main parking garage right in the center of Cincinnati. Lived down on the second level, had a little sleeping bag he slept in down there in the parking garage. And so we started hanging out with William and me and a group of friends. And there was this one friend that worked at a restaurant in Cincinnati called the Gospel Grill. And it was this place that like served food and then had musical artists come in. And he actually got William a job at the Gospel Grill. William was going to work in the kitchen at the Gospel Grill. And so my friend Ron, he got William this job, and then he started talking to some people that he knew that owned apartments, and he was on his way to getting William an apartment. Like, William was taking steps to go from being a homeless man living in a parking garage in the city of Cincinnati to having a job, which is difficult for a homeless person to get in the first place, and getting his own place to live. And I will never forget being astonished when Ron told me 3 or 4 weeks into his job, William just quit. He was done. He didn't want a job. He didn't want the responsibility. He didn't want an apartment. He didn't want to have to worry about paying bills. And William went from being on his way to being off the streets to going back to what he knew best. And what he knew best was living in a parking garage, sleeping in a sleeping bag, and panhandling during the day. And that sounds crazy to us. And I remember thinking, holy cow, like, why would you do that? Why would you sacrifice having a place to even take a warm shower at night to live in a parking garage? But when I start to look at my own life, I see similar cycles. And I imagine that if we all looked at our lives, we can see cycles of things that we return to because they are what we know best. And it is so vital when we look at relationships that we work hard, that we do the hard work of breaking cycles. You see, cycles are powerful in our lives. They are powerful forces. And we have grown up and we have lived a life from our parents that has all right, I should be back. There we go. We have a lot of cycles that have been passed down to us from our parents. You see, we grow up in family systems that feed us these cycles. And from a very early age, they are what we know. They are what we learn. The ways that we relate to people, the ways that we handle ourselves when we're frustrated, the ways that we handle ourselves when we're angry, the ways that we handle ourselves when we feel insecure. These are all cycles that are passed down to us. And if we don't recognize what those cycles are and work hard to break those cycles, our natural human tendency is to return to what we know best. And so cycles are powerful, and we have to work hard to break the cycles. Maybe you've said something like this. Maybe you've said to your parents, "When I'm an adult, I will never, ever be like you." Maybe you've heard your parents say, or other adults say, "I looked in the mirror and I realized I was my dad," or "I was my mom." And it's just another step that shows, man, we are a society of cycles. And so we have to work hard to break the cycles because we all have some cycles in our lives. The book of Romans is a very theological book, but the book of Romans at its core, at its heart, I think, now this is just me, I think the book of Romans is a book about cycles. And see, the book of Romans explains that God created the world and sin entered the world, and this cycle called sin came in and just destroyed everything. And we see that generation after generation after generation, the cycle of sin has just continued to destroy and destroy and destroy and destroy. And we see through the Old Testament, and the book of Romans explains that there were two ways that you could come to God. You could come to God by obeying the law. And God tried to set up some cycles in the lives of his people to say, teach this to your children and write it on your doorposts and make sure that they follow this so that generation after generation after generation follows me. But time and time again, we see the people of God returning to what they know, which is this cycle of sin, and it breaks the relationship with God. In the book of Romans, this first part of the book of Romans explains in Romans chapter 3, we've all sinned. We all have some cycles in our lives. Romans chapter 3, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We all have some cycles in our lives that break our relationship with God. But the beauty about what God is God is a cycle breaker. And so the book of Romans talks about how Jesus came to break the cycle of sin. Romans chapter 3, verse 23 is pretty popular. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But verse 24 is not quite as popular. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And verse 24 says, and are justified by his grace as a gift through redemption that is in Jesus Christ. For all have sinned, but all of us, that cycle of sin can be broken through Jesus Christ. We can be justified, which means we can be made whole and we can have a right relationship with God again. And the book of Romans is all about how we break these cycles in our lives. You guys, I have some cycles in my life. I grew up in a family of leaders. Like my family, my grandpa was a leader in our community. My dad was a leader in our community. It was the Mustons. We were leaders. And that was a great thing. But one of the cycles that I picked up over the course of being in the Muston family was that we're right. Like, we're leaders. We're determined, we're going to go in, and the way we do it is the right way. And if you like that, great, get behind us. If you don't like that, well, you're going to have to find something else. And you guys, I've seen this cycle come up in my life, in my relationships. I've seen this cycle come up in my life, in my relationship with my wife, where she says, CJ, dude, you gotta think about it this way. And I will fight even when I know I'm wrong. And so I have had to work really, really, really hard to recognize, man, that is a cycle in my life, and it has got to be broken. Because if I don't break that cycle, it's going to damage my relationship with my wife. And you guys have some cycles in your life also. Some cycles that are affecting your friendships. Some cycles that are affecting your relationship with your parents. Some cycles that are affecting your relationships with the people that you're dating. Some cycles that you are picking up that down the road when you decide you do want to get married, it's going to affect that relationship. And so we have to break some cycles. Our relationships will be stronger. Our friendships will be healthier. Our future family lives will be better and stronger and healthier if we start to break some cycles in our lives. And I love what Brinkley read earlier from the book of Romans, chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. I appeal to you, therefore, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. I love this idea that our lives are sacrifices. And we live lives of sacrifice to worship God. Present your lives as holy sacrifices, living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. And then I love what he says here. He says, do not conform to the pattern of this world. Don't keep going back to the cycles. Don't keep going back to what you know best, because although it's what you know best, it may not be what is best. Although your cycles are what you know best, although they are where you find your comfort, although it's where you are most comfortable, it may not be what's best for your life. What's best for your life may be to not conform to the world or to the cycles, but to step outside of that and say, I am going to be someone different, and I am going to be someone new, and I am going to break some cycles for the sake of my relationships. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed and by the renewing of your mind. So how do we break some cycles? That's the big question, and I love what the writer of Romans says about breaking cycles. He says, we need to be renewed. We need to be renewed in our minds. Our minds have to start thinking differently. We can't continue to go back to what we know best. We've got to be transformed. Our minds have to be renewed. And so how do we do that? I think there's a few ways. First of all, we have to name our cycles. That's hard. It has been, I've been married to Kirsten for 14 years. It'll be 15 years this September. And it has been hard work these 15 years naming the cycle that, I struggle to admit when I'm wrong. And we've got to name these cycles in our life. We've got to name these issues that we face. And we've got to recognize that sometimes cycles have been passed down for generation to generation to generation to generation to generation. And if you look, you can see some of these in your own family's lives. You can see that, my grandpa was angry, and my dad was angry, and now let's just do this. We can see these cycles in our lives, and we can see these cycles where we say, all right, man, I look at my grandma, and she picked awful husbands and was just attracted to the wrong men, and my mom was attracted to the wrong men, and now I am attracted to the wrong men. Those are some hard cycles to name. Those are some hard cycles to take our minds and say, all right, this is what I know best, but it may not be what is best for me. And we all have some cycles in our lives. We all have some things that we need to break, whether it's anger or whether it's jealousy or whether it's insecurity, whether it's how we view and look at ourselves. We all have some things in our life that we have to break. And it starts by naming what those things are and just being brutally honest. Some of the best ways that you can name the cycles in your life are this. Take a look at your parents. And I know we have some parents sitting in the room. I am a parent with kids in this room, and I would encourage my kids to do the same thing. Take a look at your parents. What are some things you want to do differently? I can guarantee you when you grow up, you're going to gravitate toward what they do because that's what you know. Start now. What are some things you want to do differently? Let's name some cycles. And my kids are going to start naming some cycles about me. And there are some things that they are going to want to do differently than how I do things. And they will be better than what I am as a dad because they are breaking some cycles. And their relationships, friendships, dating relationships, future relationships will be better because they are working on that now. And I encourage you guys, if you don't know what some cycles are, just look at your parents, look at your grandparents, and say, all right, what are some things I want to do differently? We've got to start by naming the cycle. Second thing we have to do is we have to start working on breaking free from those cycles now. How are you going to be different? What are some steps that you can take? The third thing is put some accountability in your life. These two kind of go hand in hand. How are you going to be different? What are some steps that you can take? For me, when it was that I was wrong, and I had a hard time admitting that I was wrong, it was that my wife could look at me and say, CJ, you're doing it again. And as much as I wanted to fight in that moment, there was part of me inside that had to say, okay, oh, dang it, she's right. Who is it in your life that you can ask and say, hey, man, I've got this cycle in my life. Like, everyone in my family has been an alcoholic. Everyone in my family has been addicted to porn. Everyone in my family has struggled with relationships and marriage. Divorce runs rampant in my family. What are the cycles, and who can you talk to and say, all right, I want to do things differently. I don't want to be the same. I don't want this cycle continuing in my life. And so I'm going to start now. Who can you go to, and who can you talk to, and who can you say, all right, when you see me start down this path, you stop me. And I'm probably going to get angry, and I'm probably going to be mean about it, and it's probably going to be really tough for me, but I want you to be the person that steps into my life that says, no, you're breaking this. It's done. Don't go down that path. I would encourage you guys, when you can name your cycle and you can find someone in your life that you can say, I want to work on this, and here's how. I want you to help me. Man, that is renewing your mind. That is renewing your mind. And guys, it takes work. Changing the way that your brain fires and the synapses in your brain and the connections that it makes and the things that you gravitate toward, that is hard work. It's not going to happen overnight. But I guarantee you, if you start now, you will be better off than if you wait until later. And so I want to encourage you guys, what are some of the cycles that you find in your own life? We've got to name them. We've got to be honest about them. And we've got to ask for some help in breaking those cycles. Practical challenge this week. I give a practical challenge every single week. Every single week I give a challenge to you guys to say, all right, if you want to take a next step in your faith, if you want something to walk out of here and say, all right, I know this is what I'm going to do this week. The practical challenge this week is simply this. I want you to write down on a piece of paper somewhere one cycle in your life. One cycle that you see that you don't want to continue. One cycle that you want to break. One cycle that you want to be different as you move forward from here. And I want you to just write that down, and I want you to begin thinking about it and praying about it. How are you going to take steps toward breaking this cycle? Who is it that you are going to talk to and say, hey, I don't want to be this person. Help me. Maybe you guys could brainstorm together some ways that you could break this cycle. But my practical challenge this week is simply this. Write it down. Start the process. Do the hard work. Start by naming your cycles and then start working on them. Check this out.